Hey everybody, welcome to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Course Pro. This is office hours for the winter and spring 2022 course. I believe this is office hour number 3. Such a pleasure to have everybody on the call live, and for everybody else who's watching this after the fact. Great to see so many folks here. So as usual, what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of the elements that I've got to touch upon, and then we're going to go into questions. And then if we have extra time, I'll take a look at next week's assignments and we'll go from there. So for everybody who isn't on the document, I just want to make sure that we've got that in the chat bar. I'm just going to put that there. So if any questions come up, just put it directly into this document at the bottom, and we can go about. And if you have any questions throughout the week and you want to just put it in there, that's great. I do take a look at these usually the night before. So the more time that I have to precog on them, the better the answer usually. All right, let's jump into this. Okay, so a couple things for me, a couple notes for me first. I don't know if I said this to all of you folks on our first video, but the video feedback that I provide, I usually delete them within 2 weeks. So if you do want to keep them, please do download them. Something I've said a number of times to a number of folks is, as we move further and further throughout the weeks, it's really important to start on the slide that you have up. So a number of folks did it this week, but basically for anybody who's new to this, what you'll do is when you're sharing your slides, you'll click on the slide that you're going to be sharing, the one that starts this week's assignments, and then go into the URL and you'll copy that URL, and you'll see at the top there's actually this slide ID, and it's going directly to that slide. And that's really important because as we get further into the assignments, we're now 50 slides deep, 100 slides deep. So that really keeps us on track. Resubmission. So there's been a couple of conversations about that. If there's marks to be gained and changes to be made, basically just reply to your original submission. If you tell me later on in subsequent assignments, oh, hey, I made the changes, that doesn't work. You have to go to the original assignment. You have to click reply and say, hey, Javan, here's the resubmission. And that allows me to go back to that assignment and make sure that it's all in that hierarchy. It's the way that Canvas works. So it's just the way we have to work with it. A couple of other things. So in base maps, if you have a compass rose pre-existing on your aerial and you decide to use that, so if you have an aerial image, you've taken it from Google Earth or Google Earth Pro, and it has a compass rose, usually just a north indicator, you only need to have one on your map. So you can remove the one from your title bar. Usually what I'll do is I will crop that aerial and I will size my scale, and I'll keep my compass rose as I've chosen it. The reason for that is that title bar can be just a copy and paste throughout all the other assignments. So through sectors and microclimates and all of the rest of them. And so it's one of those things where if we do it right once, we don't have to do it again throughout the rest of the assignments. Make sure to take a look at scale. Make sure that your units are on your scale bar. So if you're working in meters or feet, make sure you've gone through the scale ratio tutorial and made sure that you understand what that is and how that works. A couple of folks were having issues, and so they've reached out, and we've had short little Zoom chats just to go through it, but the tutorial goes through it pretty specifically. I'm just noticing the chat here. Where do we find a compass rose for Maria? So the compass rose is pre-existing, so you can use the compass rose that's existing. So if we go up to the base map and go to the horizontal title bar, this is our compass rose here. So it's an indication of the different directions and gives us a sense of where north, east, and west are. And there is a point here that says keep or change the compass rose to represent yourself or your site. So I think it's Kenneth in this group has a Nordic compass rose, really cool. A few folks in the past have brought out pieces of their heritage by creating and bringing the compass rose that their ethnicity or their religion has used, or even their region. Great way to personalize the assignment. But that's where the compass rose is. And then if you're looking for other compass roses, basically it's a Google search, just compass rose and vector, because you do want a vector or transparent PNG, else you'll be dealing with the background of whatever that image color is. Does that answer your question, Maria?
It's close enough. Good for now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you have any other questions, let me know. So a couple of examples I wanted to jump into, just showing a couple of examples from last week. So here's Ben's. Ben gives us the aerial first, which I actually really like. And he's got a number of notes. And so if there's something different about your site, it's great to make a note about it. All known fencing has been marked. The woods are still unexplored. Only buildings that will remain or be replaced or similar have been marked. Only observed properties and behaviors have been noted and marked. For example, the southeast portion of the property remains observed during rainfall, though it can be assumed the water flows to the northwest. Location of underground power and water lines unknown. So if there's something in the rubric for your assignment and you do not put it on there, I'm going to comment on it unless you make a note like, hey, looked for it, couldn't find it, still looking for it. It's a great way to make sure that I understand what's going on through your head and we can move throughout. He's got his scale down here. He's got everything we need, very tight, very connected, and then has done a phenomenal job using Google Slides just to put in all the different elements. And it's very clear, you go from one to the other. And this is really important. When you remove the aerial, we need to have all the detail still there. And a number of folks didn't have ground cover. And so white isn't a ground cover unless you've noted it. And even then, everything's white on the slide. So that's problematic. The other thing he did after some resubmission and conversations, he put his contour intervals on the right or outside of the property boundary. This is great. This allows us to look at it, but then not interrupt what's going on inside the site. The one thing I said to him, which I still believe would be good for him, is to cut off some of the, I'm just going to switch the color here. White is problematic. I would cut off the contours kind of like this if this was our cutoff. It's a lot of extra information we don't necessarily need. So I would have it a little bit outside the boundary, but not as much as he has here. Again, very specific. He's done a full grayscale. And a couple of folks have said, well, doesn't that just completely invalidate the legend? You're totally right. But the point of the grayscale is when we get to things like microclimate and zones and different overlays, that it's really easy to see where those areas are. And then we can always reference back to that base map. And then this is with the satellite as well. So really, really great broad scale, done completely in Google Slides, and just really appreciated the detail. He brought in his contours, and he traced his contours and then just put it in as an overlay there. So that was a great one. Maria had a great drawn base map, if I remember. Just going to wait for this to load here. Maybe we'll switch over. Okay. Oh, now nothing wants to load. That's fun. All right. We'll let those load for now, and then we'll come back to them a little later on. Last but not least, client images, client interviews. This is one of the first times that you've been bringing in outside data. You did in the climate survey, but any outside information, you have to give the full URL, not just a link. So the full URL and the access date. We need to make sure that people understand where the information is coming from and that we're sourcing everything. So yeah. Okay, I'm just going to go back and see if these have loaded yet. No. Oh. All right. Well, oh. Awesome. Adria?
Can I ask you something about that?
Yes, go ahead.
You said full URL. I was using the URL shortener. Is that correct?
You can, but generally what we want to use is we want to use the full URL as long as it doesn't have a search related addition. So it doesn't have a number of search related functions to it. So you can use a bit.ly or a Google shortener. Generally, we would like to have the original URL, but ultimately, I think at that level, it's up to you.
I don't know if I understand. So the full URL, for example, if it's something from Amazon, would it be amazon.com or amazon.com plus all the other stuff?
That's right.
So which one, with everything or just amazon.com?
No, you'd want the full URL. So that way, if somebody either copied and pasted it or clicked on it, okay, that you could go directly to the sourced information.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification. Okay. Oh, we're just taking a look at, oh, my mind's gone blank again.
Adria.
Say it again.
Adria. It's
Ad-
like Adrian. If you know someone named Adrian, it's just like that, but without the N. Adrian.
Adria.
Adria.
Adria. Got it. Okay. Thank you. It's that mnemonic disposition. So yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about Adria's map. I really appreciated the level of detail she brought into this. Great legends. She started to work on a abbreviated legend as well. So we have the full example of what's on site. We have contours, but she did a few little specific flow diagrams, flow arrows, which gives us a sense of generally what the water flow is. Did simple arrows and labeled all of her buildings, which was phenomenal. Also, she did a contrasted highlight of the buildings, which really gives us a sense of the ridge lines, the dormer on the front house, and the little sheds and shed roofs and things like that, which was phenomenal. Really appreciated the level of detail here. The septic's very simple and easy to understand. Everything was just very clear about this, as well as the power poles and things of that nature. The other thing she brought in, which I mentioned in her feedback, is that she picked out the ridge line. And this is something we do in keyline designs, is when we're taking a look at a landscape, we divide everything into the ridges, the valleys, and then in between the ridges and valleys, we have what's called land units. And this is exactly what we do in our roofs, and you'll do in your watershed assignment. And so when looking at this, as I was telling Adria, I'll get there. As I was telling her in her feedback, is that when we do a ridge, and I think the ridge actually comes down like this, we end up having a divide. It's kind of like the ridge in a house. So that means that from here, we know that water is going to flow. Let's take a look at our compass rose, north and south. So we've got a north and south divide here. And when we're planning for passive water harvesting, this gives us a sense of our roof sheds. And then when we go through water calculations in terms of average water per annum, and then the area of this size and space, we have a sense of total volume of gallons or liters that fall on this. Now, the next thing we would do, and this was something that we had mentioned, is that normally roads are crowned. So the middle of the road is high, the sides of the road is low. For anybody that lives in rural areas, you'll know that over years, the ruts are the low parts and the middle's high and the sides are high. But generally, when we get into asphalt and urban gravel roads, we'll have a height of land in the middle. So this then again gives us another ridge line. And then with property boundaries and whatnot, we then have these gutters or ditches that are here. And gutters, valleys or gutters or ditches, depending on what size you're working on, those get into blue. And we don't actually have a valley here. But what we end up having is we have 3 separate land units. So if we're ever calculating or working on passive water harvesting, we have a 1, we have a 2, and we have a 3. This approach created by P.A. Yeomans back in the 40s is a brilliant way to do water harvesting calculations and just understand, well, how much water am I actually working with here? So we could do the calculations for Adria's south, let's call it land unit 3, LU3 is how I mark them, LU3, LU1. And nothing like mouse drawing to make it seem like you're a child with finger paints. So with this, we could get a sense of the total volume of water. And then from there, we could do calculations, i.e. if we were thinking of harvesting and creating swale or some kind of planting, let's say that we were planning on having it on this contour. And so then we've got this area above it that, and this is getting a little crowded, so let's go back and do this again. And I'm not totally on the contour, I totally understand that. But if we did this, then we could actually calculate, well, we know where that ridge is. Here's the amount of water that's coming off of that area. And we may want to include some homes and whatnot, depending on if those homes would affect this. And then we would know the total amount of water that would be coming down to the swale. And then we would know if that would be able to support trees. And then similarly, we would go down another, let's say down here. And of course, this contour stops. So we'd have to pick it up again over here. It's the one below. And again, we would get a sense of how much water would come to this, remembering that water flows at right angle to contour. So we would get a sense of that. So I wanted to bring that up because it's an important piece when we get into watershed calculations. Her her grayscale is beautifully done. And then she's done a really great job of just overlaying a semi-transparent aerial, and we really get a sense of what she's connected and included. And then the last piece here, and it doesn't show up as well on my screen, but she's put a dotted line that shows us the forest, and then has put it in here that it's the forest as well. And the only thing I might have done here is just give it a little bit more of internal color, just to really showcase that this is this has some a different type of area within it. But wanted to show this off because it was really well done. And then, all right, I turned off Maria's just to, let's see if it wants to load for us. Show the drawn map conversation as well. Yeah, we'll give it that some time to load. Okay. Diana, is the SectorCompass the best tool to choose a region to live? I'm considering moving to Portugal and buying land there. I don't know where yet. I'm considering from the greater Lisbon to the Algarve region. Great, congratulations. Currently right now, and I do this for clients, is they'll want me to evaluate a country or an area. I've done this in British Columbia where I live, and I'm currently doing it in Mexico for a client. And what I do is I start with the keyline scale of permanence. So I start with climate. So generally I'm trying to ask, well, what's the climate that you want to live in, or what are the activities you want to do, and what are the climates that would support that? So for example, in Mexico, the project is they're looking to grow. They want to be insulated from climate change, because of course, the closer you move to the border, what we're taking a look in terms of the climatological data that's coming out is that we're getting bigger swings, and those swings are the swings are they're more impactful closer to the equator. So we're moving them away from the coast, and specifically away from the eastern coast, the western coast as well, due to things like Fukushima and the Pacific Rim earthquakes and tsunamis, which are overdue right now. So we're taking a look at a certain region in between a certain elevation. So we're taking a look at somewhere between 500 to 1500 feet above sea level. And we're looking at having them around a body of water, because it has a moderating effect. So you don't get as much heat and humidity in the summer months. And then we're taking a look at then social situations. How far do they want to be from an airport? How far do they want to be from this and that? So basically, I go down that keyline scale of permanence, and I go down step by step by step by step, thinking, okay, what does the client want? And then using that as a metric to start to remove different areas, because constraints are fantastic in design. This is one of the things that I think people get frustrated by. Oh, my site's too small, or oh, I don't have enough wind, or oh, I have too much wind or water. Constraints basically create the design. The more constraints you have, the easier it is to design. The more you'll find the sentimentality you bring to design being challenged, like, oh, I want this to happen, when the design is saying that's not an option. But generally the constraints are fantastic, because it really does constrain the design. So that's how I go about decoding a new country or region. And then from there, once I have a couple of sample properties, then I will go into something like a sector analysis of each property. This was especially true from clients last year that were looking at different properties in British Columbia, and they were worried about wildfire, which is a big risk up here. And so we were taking a look and assessing fire risk. And so we're taking specifically at slope, we're taking a look at wind, we're taking a look at fuel load. And so for that, you do use a SectorCompass and go, okay, well, where are they in the slope? Are they in the top of the bottom? Because fire moves up slope, and the top of the hill is the most exposed and risky. You know, where is that? Where's the house existing? What's the fire risk or fire rating for that? And then moving down slope from there. So I would use the keyline scale of permanence to take a macro viewpoint of a landscape, and then I would move down. And once I found a couple of places I liked, I would then move to a SectorCompass. Does that answer your question? Okay, thumbs up. Awesome. So Ron, for assignment 3 on section drawing, elevation cross section, how do I determine which cross section points are best suited for my design site? Can you have more than one? Is it best that I explore options before choosing? For reference, this is my aerial imagery and photos where my new tiny home will be built. Oh, congratulations. Cool. So I'm just going to pull this up. So a couple things. First and foremost, and I think you're on the call. Yeah. in terms of our site here, Saran, what is our elevational difference? Like, what's the height of the south corner to the east corner to the north, like where J is, and to the southwest corner?
The elevation's about 300 up the top, along 200 to 300. And then the bottom is about, I think it was, I have to go to my screen. So I'm just on your screen right now.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. So, sorry, I'm just going to go to my Google map. Points. Elevation. Sorry, I've been having a little challenge with Google Map, and it used to tell me where the elevation was, and I can't find it. So
Okay.
I've created another point on Google Map, and I am in like that pinpoint, but I don't see the elevation.
Okay. Well, generally, where J is that higher or lower than the easternmost portion of the property?
So A is what I called south. So J is much lower than where my design site is.
So J is lower than your A marker.
That's right.
And then the easternmost corner over here, I'll pull out some drawing tools.
Oops.
So here, this corner, what is this in relation to A and J?
It slopes down a little bit further, so it's still higher than J.
Higher than J? Okay.
A lot higher, yeah.
And is it higher than A?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so this is this the highest point of the property, the eastern side?
No, it's not. The highest point is on the other side of the property. Like if you go to the property line, it's not showing there, but the corner here where you have your marker, if you go up to the corner where the property line ends, that's high.
Okay, so this is high. And then basically the property slopes down this way?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, cool. All right. That gives me a bit of context.
Sorry.
Also, no worries. Also, the link you gave me, I don't have access. So if you can just change permission to viewing.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. So all these little tiny details. Yeah. So in terms of the cross section, if generally, I'm just going to switch to blue here because blue is for water. Generally, if it sounds like this is a bit of a water course, and then we have basically arrows coming this way, and I'm doing this when I know I've got there we go. Okay, cool. So yeah, I would say depending on where your house is going to be sure, I would do a cross section between that. And again, cross sections can be A to A apostrophe or A to B. So that would be a cross section I would be interested in. If you were going to use any sort of water from what looks like a water course here, I might be very interested to see what the relationship is of the southeasternmost property line. And then I'm depending on undulations on the landscape, I also might be interested in a cross section here. While cross sections are time consuming, they're probably one of the most illuminating design studies we can do upon a design site, because they give us elevational differences, but they also give us a sense. They start off our conversation about solar access analysis. So when you take a look at your winter and your summer sun, and you do a cross section, when you do a cross section that's east to west, you really do get a sense of how that, or even north to south, you really do get a sense of how that solar analysis will take in. So if we take and do a drawing here, where let's say, I've got that, yeah. So if this is our drawing, and south is over here and north is over here, and we start doing our drawing, we can all of a sudden get a sense of are our trees going to have the amount of solar access we want? If our summer sun is like X and our winter sun is like Y, then we get a sense that yes, the placement between our, let's call it our conifer and our deciduous tree, we know that the conifer at max canopy maturity isn't going to shade out our deciduous tree. So this can be a great thing to add into our cross section. Best suited. So I would determine first the house site, I think would give you a cross section across your landscape, would give you a good sense of where you might want to place the house. Can you have more than one? Yes. Is it best that I explore options before choosing? Definitely. Take a look at the elevational differences and really consider, okay, where am I planning on planting? Where am I planning on growing? A lot of folks will do a cross section that has no relevance to their site and actually doesn't give them a lot of information. So really think about what it is in your client survey that is being asked for, and then go from there. Does that help?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's it. That's all our questions today. Sweet. And you just shared the link again. Awesome. Cool. All right. Let's go back to Maria's. Oh, that's not right. There we go. Huh. Just doesn't want to load. Well, I will tell you, Maria's map was fantastic. It was a great example. And someday when it decides to load, here we go. Right. So Maria had an architectural survey that she was working with, and then did a very simple drawing over top. And this is one of the great examples of how our drawings can be very simple, very easy. They can give us a lot of detail and a lot of conversation that's right off the bat. And I think this was the sort of the wet area, if I remember correctly. Yeah, the wetland. So get a sense of the wetland as well. This is a great level of light that's being used. I find one of the main issues when you're doing drawings and then bringing them over into the base maps is there's not enough light. So this is great, and it's indoors. Usually I'll take images of my maps. If I'm doing them, I'll do it outdoors during a sunny day, just that way I can grab that. She's also given us a little cutout of her scale bar, which is fantastic. And given us a great legend. So the only thing I said to her during my feedback is that there's a couple of different elements here, and there's 3 different legends, and I would just unify them so that we have one legend and one background. And then I think the other piece was that we need to understand what the ground cover is overall. But I wanted to show a great example of just a very simple drawn base map, and that it can be this simple. Because I think a lot of people think that to become a designer, you have to be a digital designer, and that's not the case whatsoever. We can definitely work in different ways here. Yeah, there we go. Saran, looks great, Maria. I find that drawing was a lot easier to start. Yeah, well said. So thanks everybody for your great work this week. Really appreciate it. Okay, let's take a look. If there's no other questions, just flying along today. Let's take a look at the upcoming assignments. So site and regional challenges. So generally what we're trying to do is get a sense of what is the bigger context of where your site lives. What are the bigger conversations? And for the person who's thinking of moving to Portugal, this is a great assignment to do, to really understand, well, what kind of challenges and what kind of opportunities am I jumping into? So what are the problems and weaknesses of that site in that main context? What are some of the obstacles to that, the cost to that? What are the cultural and social economic challenges? What are some of the strengths and opportunities there? Pulling in photos or data points. What are the most likely natural disasters? This is one of the reasons why I moved away from the coast of British Columbia. I used to live on a small island, and just seeing everything that was happening, I didn't feel safe and comfortable for myself living on that island anymore. And then here, in terms of the problems and weaknesses, you don't know everything yet, and we acknowledge that, but you're starting to say, well, this is the problem that I see on a regional challenge or a site challenge, and this is the specific site solution that I think I can apply. So really starting to match problems, because there's an opportunity there to do that. And then with the SectorCompass, what we're trying to understand is, where is the wind coming from, and in what direction, and in what season? If you have more data on that, that's great. Make sure that's in your climate analysis. Do you have fire? Some folks in urban environments, the the fire sector is just ubiquitous. It's all around and equally, so you can remove that if you want, just make a note. Where do visitors come from? What are good views? So sometimes there's desirable views and sometimes there's undesirable views. So where are those views and how do they affect? Where does wildlife come through? Sometimes we need to put in a little tracking mark about, well, the deer come through this area and they come from this direction. What's water look like and what's water flow? So again, we've got some arrows that come in. Now you might think, well, that's pretty basic compared to a map, and you'd be right, but it gives us a general sense of that area. What kind of pollution is coming in? So is there overspray from egg fields? Do we have site contamination? Do you know you have a neighbor that dumps oil when they're doing a oil change on their car? Is there noise pollution? Is there sound pollution? Is there smells, undesirable smells? I did a design for a site just out of Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, and there's a pulp and paper mill there. And we ended up creating an entire shelter belt, not only for view and wind, but also for olfactory. So we had a number of different flowers that were blooming over top of each other. So there was always a more desirable smell than the pulp and paper mill. For anybody who's ever lived near pulp and paper mills, you'll know the smell. It's very distinct. So we wanted to create more of an olfactory buffer as well. Summer sun, winter sun. So that's getting into those two angles. And there's a whole tutorial on how to find those angles and represent them appropriately. You'll see here that we've got a vertical title bar. If you're already using a horizontal and want to bring that in, that's fine. I think we used this here just as a placeholder. So that's just there for that. And then here what we've got is we've got our base map. This individual decided to include the key. You know, you can include the key in this, but we're really just looking for the sectors. So you don't have to include the key, but it is important to have at least our compass rose. And if you want to scale down your scale bar and put it in there, you can. Definitely not necessary though. We're really just trying to say, what are the influences of the site that comes in? And then after we have a sense of what those influences are, you make a small note of if I'm going to deflect them, use them, amplify them. We really want to get a sense of what's the use here. And of course, there's actually another aspect, which is we're just going to ignore or not address it at all. So there's that opportunity as well. Any questions about that? Any questions about the upcoming assignments for next week?
Yes. I was having trouble understanding the colored circle or the pie shapes. Are they percentage? Are they the location of the site?
Yeah, it's direction. And so it's basically saying, in what direction is this coming in from? And in terms of what field of view, so is it at degree 80 and 120? Is it 30? So when you go through the tutorial on sun earth tools or sun calc tools, you'll get a sense of what is the winter sun angle and what is the summer sun angle. And then that gives us a real sense of where does the sun come up on the horizon at summer solstice, and where does it set at summer solstice, and where does it set on winter solstice. Sunrise at winter solstice and sunset at winter solstice. So it's all degree angles on the compass.
Okay, so for like the first one, it's saying that basically means that there's hazard for fire from all directions, potential for water from all directions because the blue goes around. But the wildlife only comes in from about 80%.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, it says that on that compass rose, basically north by northeast is where that wildlife comes in, and then south by southwest is where that wildlife comes in. It's just giving you a sense of the directional area that influence comes onto the site. And this is why sometimes people will do two colors for wind. They'll do a winter wind and they'll do a summer wind, just like a winter and a summer sun. If your site is more specific, then you can definitely do that.
Okay. I'm still having trouble understanding the wind maps.
Okay.
So I'm
like, do you have a compass rose wind map, or?
from my wind thing, it basically, I couldn't figure out how to read the wind chart.
Oh, okay. Do you have an example that you'd like to share with us and we can walk through it?
Yeah, I can. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. How do I share my, can I share my screen or?
Yeah, just let me enable permissions. Okay, go for it.
Where's share screen? Okay, share screen. Here. Share. Okay. So I found a written article that told me which direction the winds came from different times. But when I'm looking at the chart, it makes no sense to me.
Sure, sure. So basically what it's saying is, as we take a look at, could you zoom in a little bit on this, Suzanne?
Yes, let's see.
Bottom right-hand corner, you've got a little zoom bar there. And then you'll probably have to reposition to bring this, yeah, direct and center. Great, awesome.
Right.
No worries. Great. So basically, on the left-hand side, we're saying what is the total percentage of wind? And so we've got a total percentage, and then we have the different directions that are represented in different colors. Blue is north, green is east, south is red, and west is brown. And you'll see at the bottom, it says the percentage of hours to which the wind of each of the 4 cardinal directions, excluding hours in which the, I can't read that word, wind is less than 1.0 mph. Around the boundaries, the percentage of hours spent in the implied intermediary direction. So basically it's transition. So there's a percentage if you treat each one of these markers, this 0, actually I can draw on yours. I remember this now. Let me just pull up my tools.
I read that to be that it kind of was, the west and north were more, but it was pretty close to all 4 directions.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Totally. So the west is a higher percentage here at like 30 to 35%, let's say, or 37%, if we take a look at where the red line is in January.
Okay.
And if we take a look at the top, and this is why there's 2 markers, there's a marker on the right-hand side and the left-hand side. It looks to be about 25% north, and then maybe 10 to 15% east, and 10 to, or probably a bit more, maybe 20% south. And then if you move that line throughout, and let's say go to something like September, you can see that the westerly winds are actually quite a bit more, or pardon me, easterly winds are quite a bit more, and the west actually dies down. So September is this change maybe in the jet stream. I'd have to take a look at your site to know a bit better, but it's one of the times when the westerly wind dies down. The southerly is about the same, but you can see that the east kind of bulges a bit, as does the north a bit. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. Because that's what was confusing to me, because I got, the chart, and then, but it looked, in my thing, I said I thought it was about equal.
Yeah.
From the different things, because when I physically been on the site, I've only felt it from the south and the east. So when I found this data, it was very confusing to me.
Yeah, and the thing about the data is the data doesn't include any of the topography of your site or the wind breaks or the wind breaks of your neighbors. So none of that would be included in this metadata, which is usually taken by either a weather station or at the airport from a weather station. So usually those airports are completely open. They don't have wind breaks. They're not there. So you'd have this sort of baseline data that then you would have to interpret for your site.
Okay. Makes sense.
Does that make sense?
A lot more sense. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Awesome. I'll just get you to stop share. And anybody else? Any other questions? Anything under the sun as it pertains to permaculture design or what's going on, or any aha moments that anybody wants to share from the course thus far? It's been great to see some of those in the final portion of the SWOT analysis.
I would have 2 questions.
Sure, go for it, Chris.
Guess they're splitting hairs, so they're really minuscule, but 2 things you mentioned in the tutorial videos, and also I got that as a feedback. There's always good to include the Latin name of trees, which I see why it makes sense, because it's just really like easy to identify no matter what language we apply it to. So it's like translatable, obviously. Now I have the challenge that I know some trees, but especially the fruit trees. Okay, I've got like say 20 apple trees, but there are a bunch of different varieties, and I don't even know if some of them might be wild or some of them might be cultivated, because before we bought it, the site had been abandoned for 30 years. So for all I know, a bunch of the trees are wild apple trees. Does it make sense to then, in quotation marks, bother with the Latin name, just say Latin and then variety question mark? Or could I just like say that as a side note that, okay, I know obviously that Robinia pseudoacacia and the Ailanthus altissima, they're easy to identify, but when it comes to the fruit trees, I've got 20 apple trees, and for all I know, they might be of 20 different varieties.
Yeah, great question. So for those, I would go with Malus, because that's the family name, and probably Malus X, which is nomenclature that I know the family, but I'm uncertain about the speciation, about the cultivar. And then from there, I would take the next step and really take this next year, because I don't think you're on site currently, right? You go back and forth.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So when you're there, what I would do is I would start to make a study of the trees. I would label the trees. I would use metal labels. These are aluminum labels that have a wire on them, and put them onto a branch that you know will be there indefinitely. So that way you can start to mark them. And I would number them. This is what fruit explorers will do. They'll number them, and then they'll make a study of the tree in terms of size, shape, photographs, leaves. So what are we taking a look at leaf shape? And there's a whole dichotomous key off of that. And then also fruit. So when is it setting? When is it? When do buds emerge? When does bud break? When do flower emerge? When does fruit start to set? When does harvest start to set? When does apple drop or fruit drop start? And all of that is data that, if you're planning on being there for a number of years, which I think you are, you can then start to slowly identify them and see if you do have genetics that you'd want to keep. And then from there, with that from those data points, you can either join fruit explorer groups or plant ID groups, which I'm a part of a number of them on Facebook and a number of them on Reddit. And usually within 24 hours, if a number of these books back here, their dichotomous keys. Dichotomous keys are basically going through a series of questions that allow you to come to speciation or plant speciation. If I can't get that, and sometimes I'm lazy like the rest of everybody, sometimes I'll just go right to the group and say, hey, I don't know what this is. Because then I can leave that there and come back in a day. It's like, hey, there's the answer. But then there's two applications that I was recently introduced to. I haven't used them, but they come highly recommended by students. And I've put them in the resource section of the question doc. One is Picture This and iNaturalist. And apparently they've been doing really well for students. I was at the beginning of the app revolution for Plant ID, and they were terrible. And I never came back. And so I'm just kind of coming back to apps for Plant ID, but I would do it that way long term, and then short term just go Malus X, because that'll let us know. It's like, we don't know what the species is, but you got the information.
Oh, that's great. You also answered one of my next questions, which I was going to ask if you have any recommendations for apps to identify plants, and I've been playing around with Picture This, so that's good to hear that I at least already downloaded some of the right apps possibly. And it's also good to, like, okay, I don't know, but I should know in the future. So that's definitely a good pointer to mark them and then just start observing them. One other question, and this is really splitting hairs, I guess, but so in all of the slides, the address of the property name, etc., they're repeating. Given that, like, I always need to give the coordinates, name, and the address and such. And given that sometimes you try to fit a lot of information on the map, I was wondering is there any reason, since we already specified the site on the first slide in the slide deck, does it make sense to always repeat it in every assignment? Is that mostly so that you as a tutor don't always have to jump to the first and then already know, okay, like this is the coordinates, this is the country, so you have a rough ID? Should we always include that, or can we just kind of, I guess, make the lazy choice and label it data redundancy and remove it from the slides? Yeah,
good question. So this gets into the conversation of, you are both a student and you're a student that's working towards a design deliverable, and the portfolio is a blend of two, right? It's it's portion of deliverables. There's aspects of the portfolio I would deliver to a client, but there's aspects of the portfolio that are for you as a student to communicate your education and your learning journey. When I work with maps, so when I'm developing a feasibility study, which is how we start off with, the maps that I develop for these clients are going to be maps that are specific to the site. So this is what is this one? So this is a solar radiation map. So that solar radiation map, potentially, here we go. Yeah, like that. That solar radiation map will be specific to that site and will likely be separate for that client. So they will normally not have a portfolio, student portfolio to go through. So for the client side of it, and to train you in a way that makes you go, okay, if I make a map, it's for a client and that client will read it at some point, I would say keep it. I imagine from a student's perspective, going through it every single time can be, well, because it's a copy and paste, it's not even a time consuming thing. It's probably just, that persnickety-ness that makes us go, do I have to have this in every single one?
No,
But
you did answer it, because I mean, if I do it for a client and I have all of the different maps, then it doesn't necessarily make sense to reproduce it. But the example you just brought, that sometimes you just have one specific highlight, you don't go through what is our entire assignment. So that clears it up. That makes sense.
okay, sounds good. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions or any questions that came off of that question? Are we getting out of here early today? Oh, I like this. This is rare. This is rare. Okay. All right. Well, I'm just going to take a look at my notes and see if there was absolutely anything else I wanted to pass on to you folks. I think I've made it pretty clear that, we're working on understanding the design process and putting the design process into play. It isn't about making perfect maps or perfect slides. That's just a benefit of this process to build more capacity and to really make sure that your design is communicated clearly. I would always err on the side of communicating clearly as opposed to being more complex or more detailed. We really want to make things clear and clean. Couple things that are coming up. Normally, I would say go and do this early, but because we're in winter, we're probably going to be on the cusp for things like soil. And so you may find as we come into your spring, you can start to work the ground. If you can't work the ground, what you'll do in the soil assignment is just mark where you would make your tests, and then you'll have to do a test with some soil you find, be it a potted plant inside a house or some soil you can move, just to show that you know the skills and tools. That's about it. Oh, this is great. Oh, we do have a hand being raised. I see it. Go for it.
So with the soil samples thing, my husband said, well, why don't we just get out there with a pickaxe? Because, it's all under snow, right?
Yeah.
Why don't we just get out there with a pickaxe? Is that a valid way to collect a sample?
Where do you live?
In the Okanagan.
Okay. Yeah. So we're rather close to each other. No. There's a few reasons for that. You're going to have a frost depth, and that frost depth is not going to act in the way that soil will act when it's growing and when the soil food web's alive. So while I love and applaud your husband's ambition and fortitude, the way that the soil and the water interacts with frozen soil, which is usually slightly hydrated and then frozen, so it'll expand and it'll look very different and act very different than terrestrial soil, let's call it, when we're into the summer and that soil has dried out or gotten to a place where it'll go to what's called field capacity and saturation, and it'll have interstitial airspace, which is airspace in between the little PEDs. This is what we call the molecule of soil. So when sand, silt, and clay are together, we call it a soil PED. It'll act differently. So short answer, no. Long answer, applaud the enthusiasm. Really applaud the enthusiasm.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Great question. Really great question. Anything else? I know that there's been a couple of conversations about different types of mapping software like Contour Map Generator. And if folks didn't see that, point in the discussion, just be aware that all the data from Google Earth and from things like contour map generators and things like that is all from this shuttle radar topographic mission, the SRTM mission that NASA flew in 2000, where they ran LiDAR. LiDAR stands for light image detection and radar. They basically shot a laser down at the Earth, and when it came back, it gave them a sense of the depth of what they're seeing in space, and thus it gave us a topographic, what's called a digital elevation model of the ground. But each pixel size was 30 meters, and because of that, if you have any elevational changes that are sub 30 meters, and we all do, the computer has to interpret it. And sometimes that interpretation can be off by up to 15 meters in the vertical axis and 5 meters on the X and Y. That doesn't mean don't use it. That doesn't mean don't use it for consideration, but understand that you'll always have to go and ground truth whatever design you're working on or whatever conversation you're working on. I had a client near here who used one of those functions that was a paid function. So you paid for it and it produced a bunch of outputs, but the contours were literally perpendicular to what they were on the landscape. And so we went and did a survey and put that all together for them. So yeah, just keep that aware that Google Earth uses that data. And I'm sure at some point, an Elon Musk of the world or Google itself or NASA will do another LiDAR scan of the Earth, and we'll move down to a meter or sub-meter. And at that point, everyone will have access to that data. But until that point, we work with a lot of different mapping tools. It'll put a lot of people out of business, actually, once that happens. But if you get me on mapping, I'll talk forever. So we should probably call that. And last call, any other questions, final questions, anything in the world? Don't feel that it needs to be fully formed or it needs to be specific. Oh, you're so welcome. Yeah. Pleasure chatting. It's nice to have these little chats. Nice to be able to see everybody's faces and start to have a conversation in real time. Going once.
Maybe one last thing from me, just a
yes,
bit of
please.
appreciation. I really enjoy that we get a grade and then we can resubmit if we think we've got a bit of space to improve. And just as a funny anecdote, we were just talking with some friends about the education system, and I was telling them that, yeah, I got like a grade and I can resubmit if I want to improve. And they were like, well, that's like cheating. That's not real university. But then like, it was ironic because before that we were talking about how the university system and the whole grading system is giving wrong incentives. And this is really how education should be, that you don't necessarily have the pressure, and then, you know, okay, like this is the areas I can improve. And then I get a second feedback. So it's not just singular feedback. I just thought I'd mention it because it was really, really funny. I was talking to my friends about how the education system might be failing us. I gave them an anecdote and their knee-jerk reaction was exactly what they were arguing against. And it's good to see that the PDC with the Oregon State University is not doing that. So I really appreciate that.
Oh, that's such a good point, Chris. And the irony that the factory worker, and I say that because school was originally created for factory workers. It was created to create individuals who were replaceable as cogs are replaceable. Like, oh, I can put in this person with a B of Ed and it'll be the same as this person. And yeah, the fact that your friends had the knee-jerk reaction of that's cheating, it really makes you know that the conditioning was good in school.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you bring up the factory worker reaction, because this is also exactly one of the examples a friend of mine brought up in that very same conversation, that the education system was created to specialize us towards one specific outcome, and it's coming from the conveyor belt approach of like factory work. I was just really, really, as you said, yeah, the conditioning is working. It's just really funny to see, and at the same time, it's really nice to see that there's alternative education approaches, and that the PDC happens to be one of them. It's really great.
Yeah, and this has always been my approach to it. And I don't know if the other instructors take this approach, but life isn't an Olympic sport. Like we don't have this one moment and we're judged on that moment forever. In reality, sometimes there are institutions or aptitude tests or things of that nature that try to force function that viewpoint on us. But that's not the case. Life is aggregate. Life is a sculpture that never finishes until we finish. And then depending on your beliefs, we continue or not. But there's never this point where it's over. And especially in land design, this is why I won't call anything a final design. It's all a working concept. And I've got a client right now that's having emotional issues with that, that's having sentimental issues. The way that they look at it, they're like, no, there's a final design, and what's on paper will look like on property, but that never happens because we're working with a living system that changes and grows with us. And so if we put a tree in place, we've changed a niche. We've changed the subsoil. We've changed the way that the wind flows. We've changed the way that the sun will cast upon that area around it. And every time we take an implementation, this is why the burden is always on the designer. Always. It's always on our burden. And somebody this week was saying, hey, I've got this potential species that's pretty invasive in my area. Do you think I should put it in? And it always becomes upon us to go, okay, how advantageous is this plant? And if this plant gets put into place, who's going to deal with this in 10 years, 100 years, 150 years? And this is what's so important about, I think, permaculture in general, is that it is renaturalizing, rewilding, bringing us to a level of ancestral knowledge that goes, life changes when we implement upon it. And so the grades for me is an offshoot of that. I love this this show, Whose Line Is It Anyways? I don't think it's on anymore, but it's an improv show, and they always have this line that where the games are made up and the points don't matter. And that makes me think about life all the time. We make up our own grading system. We make up our own conversation about what is or what isn't true. But outside of ecology doesn't care about our sentimentality, never has. And that's hard for a lot of people to take into play. So the grades really are just, signposts like, hey, take a look at this, here's this conversation, but there's always room for innovation. Like I might say something and you might go, you're out to lunch, I'm going to do it this way. Great. My suggestions are only from my set and my 10 years, 12 years of doing this. So yeah, I love that you brought up that point. That's great. That makes me think about a lot of elements about how that plays, especially when it comes to this work and how permaculture and other types of regenerative land design processes are really about opening the book of nature, as my mentor Sepp Holzer said, and reading the book. And then when, not if we read the book wrong, we go back and read again. And this has happened every single year that I've been growing, every single year that I've been designing. I'll see something, I'll read something and go, oh, wow, I've had that wrong for a number of years. Great. I'm still alive. I can still reread that book of nature. I can still improve upon that. And for me, I think that gives us a lot of leeway to fail better. We've been failing on a number of levels pretty hard as a species. And so if I fail wrong by killing a couple of plants, and this is an old joke, gardener is just Latin for plant killer, because the number of plants you kill as a gardener is just massive to the amount that succeed. Because as life goes on, as life changes, this year I had locust. So grasshoppers are solitary creatures. They're small bodied, they're green. And when they have a very dry spring, and as they go into a very hot summer and they get a lot of sunlight, and this was proven down in Michigan, they forced grasshoppers to transform into locusts. What'll happen is too much serotonin, and the grasshoppers will move from solitary to gregarious. So they'll become a communal animal. They'll go from soft body green to hard body orange, red, brown. And then they'll swarm and they'll devour like 10 to 20 times their body weight every single day. And in 12, 13 years of growing, I'd never experienced locust, and lost about 85% of my garden. And because of that, about 90% of our food, because of the way we upgrade our food stuff. So you're always learning every single year, and it's just an opportunity to learn. So I'm just noticing a couple extra questions here, but Chris, does that, yeah, okay, thumbs up, thanks, man. Zach, water flows on flat sandy areas. So when we take a look at different types of water flows, that water will flow if the structure of the soil gets to what's called saturation. Then we'll get subsurface flow. So if all the interstitial pore space gets filled with water, then you'll have overland flow. So usually in flat sandy areas, you're not seeing a lot of water flow. Usually flat and sandy means the water hits and then soaks in. So I'm on a bench here. So we're in a valley, and then I'm up on a bench because of the way the glaciers came through and carved everything. And so on this bench, it's super porous. So the water that falls soaks in. So ostensibly on my flats, I don't have a lot of water flow. There's a couple of kettles, kind of depressions. And so I know water will aggregate in there just because of the depression. So if it's a depression, the water is going to flow at right angles. As I go back into a slope, it's going to flow down, because eventually either the ground will get frozen due to winter, and thus we'll have a time period when the water will flow over it. But generally, it doesn't. So Maria had a similar question. How do we mark water flows on flat areas? So generally, if it's just flat and it looks like there's no water flow in any direction, just make a note, says flat area, no water flow. But I will challenge everyone during the rainy season of your environment, whatever and whenever that might be. And understandably, there's places like Saudi Arabia that get 4 inches of rain every 2 to 3 years. And sometimes there's no years with no rain. So I get that. But go out during the rainy season, put on your rubber boots, put on your rain jacket, put on a hat, go watch the water. So coming up to spring, we have what's called freshet, which is the spring melt. And I'll go out and I'll walk my property and any properties that I'm designing. So clients know that come springtime, I'm heading towards where they are, and I'm going to be walking the land in rubber boots because I want to see if all of these digital models that I have actually come true. So we always want to go and take a look at those. So for both of you folks, Zach and Maria, I would say if it's flat, just make a note on your base map, flat area, no observed water flow during the rainiest season. And if you haven't done that yet, say flat area, assumed flat area, will go out and watch during rain season. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Any follow-up questions to that, either Zach or Maria? Zach, so the water that collects during the rainy season in low spots, is the flooding from the water table being high? Yes. So subsurface, and we don't go into it a lot in this course, but man, there's an amazing resource. Actually, it's right there. This right here is an amazing soil resource for anybody in Canada. If anybody's interested, let me know and I'll put it in the resources. Subsurface water flow could be aquifer, can be sublaminar flow. So basically there's an underground river. And sometimes when we have great deluges, great water events, that water will come down, hit those subsurface flows, and then start to accumulate up to and poke out of the ground. So we'll get flooding areas, or we'll get artisanal springs. We'll get all of these different types of water courses and situations. So that water that collects in a so-called flat area is coming from subsurface. You're totally right. It's not coming from overland flow. So we can have water that comes up from below or water that comes up from above. We can also have dew and fog points that come in and collect, but that's a great follow-up question. Does that answer your question, Zach? Yeah, thank you. Okay, great. Awesome. All right, folks, we are absolutely now at the hour. So we ended up getting to the end all the same. Such a pleasure to see everybody. And thanks so much for your great questions. Any other questions or comments, again, you can always send me an email. If you're really struggling with anything, be it the digital aspect or concept, you can reach out and I can answer directly via email, or if we need to jump on Zoom quickly, every once in a while, you just need a little bit of help. That's totally fine. Don't have to struggle indefinitely. If there's something that you're coming up against, definitely reach out. We're here to help. That's what the whole point is. And play. Don't forget to play with this work. So much of this is about moving things around and playing with it and really enjoying it. And if you find you're getting a bit too stressed out, remember that this is play. Remember that we're trying to grow, and we grow and we learn better when we're smiling and when we're enjoying things. So thanks so much. Yeah, you're so love the appreciation. And we'll see you folks in the next one. This will be up in the next little while. Oh, last point. Bunch of folks were asking where are the follow-ups to these, and I don't. It was in the original email, but I'll just show everybody now. So when we go to our group, right at the top here, the pin discussion, OSU PDC PRO 2022 Winter Spring Office Hours, we click on that. And as you go down, you're going to have these previous office hours. So these are our office hours. And so when we finish today, I'll put the next one here. This is previous office hours from last semester. There might be something in there you're interested in. And then every once in a while, when I have these student mentorship sessions and it makes sense, I'll record it and I'll put it on here. So just keep that in mind, that you do have access to those previous elements, and we can go from there. Yeah, within 48 hours, Saran. So the recorded video is always up within 48 hours of recording. Sometimes sooner. It just depends on upload times and if the horses get out, or if I have to go chop firewood, or any number of things when you're homesteading. All right, folks, thank you again. Such a pleasure to see you. And we'll chat again in 2 weeks' time. And any questions, do let me know. Take care.